and that's the thing. No human being looked like that.
Right.
Right? So if you put him with Ric Flair and with Arn Anderson and Ole, they badgered Ole to get back on camera about that point. You know, they had high hopes. And Sid made a lot of money in the wrestling business. And I mean, right now, you know, as Ole said about me one time, I'll say the same thing about Sid. Ole said, Cornette, I used to think you were a dumb fuck, but so many other dumb fucks have come along worse than you. You've moved up the ladder without doing anything. Sid would be one of the better workers in the business these days.
So, what did Rick and Ole think of Sid?
I once again, I don't want to reflect. Everybody was, look at him, you know. But and plus Hurd was pushing for it. And, you know, Sid, if he had just understood how to work like a giant but be vulnerable sometimes, he had the promo, it just something didn't, but he wasn't ever dedicated fully. I mean, I've told the story on another one of our releases where when he was in the WWF, he was making $400 grand a year, he fucking got hurt or whatever, and he went home, and Vince finally was fed up and said, tell fucking Sid he's got to be at Raw on Monday. He doesn't have to wrestle, but he's got to do a promo. Paying him $400 grand a year. So I called his wife. He was playing softball. I'm not lying about that. And I said, Sid's got to be there. Well, he hasn't worked out in a couple weeks, and he hasn't tanned. I said, Vince says he needs to be there and do a promo. San Antonio at Raw. She said, sometimes Sid feels like he'd be happier if he went back to selling farm chemicals. Maybe we all would too. So he goes to San Antonio and comes out on the stage with all the other big baby faces at the start at Seg 1, and then in Seg 7, we supposed to do the interview. We're looking around for Sid. Here comes fucking Bruno, Harvey Whippleman. Said, so where's Sid? He said, I just took him back to the hotel. He thinks he's having a heart attack. So you didn't take him to the hospital? He said, no, he wanted to go to the hotel because he thinks he's having a heart attack. And he didn't show up. He went back to the hotel, didn't do the fucking promo. And that's when Vince told him that he was going to prorate his contract. He was only going to pay him for shows that he showed up for, and he wasn't going to get paid for shows he didn't, and that's when Sid never came back. But also, I told Hurd one time, because Hurd loved Sid. He just loved the way he looked and everything. I said, Jim, you'd rather have Sid Vicious than Arn Anderson, wouldn't you? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, Sid Vicious is the kind of guy that would make you $1 million in one night on pay-per-view. He said, oh, what's the matter with that? I said, because after the people see it, they never want to see it again. I said, but Arn Anderson will draw you steady money for 20 fucking years. He couldn't get it.
Didn't get it. So does this mean there's no more committee? It's Ole in the driver's seat?
Well, there was still a committee, but Ole took the Flair spot in that there has to be a guy, head booker, right? So Ole was named the head booker, but he still had to talk to Jim Barnett and Jim Hurd and Jody Hamilton and Jim Ross and whoever else at the time. I can't. So many people came in and out. Whoever else at that time, but they gave Ole actually. When you think about it, as you'll see with the talent that comes in and the things that go on, he gave Ole much more freedom than he'd given Flair. And the talent roster and the numbers show it. As a matter of fact, by the end of April, remember that 4.0 on Saturday night that Flair got? Down to 2.6. Remember the 4.4 on Sunday? Down to 2.7. Nearly in half.
What's your reaction when you hear Ole is given control?
I didn't really mind at that point because I figured, Jesus, anybody knows more about wrestling than Hurd, and I didn't know what Ole was going to do, and I've made amends with Ole since then, but it was brutal. It was brutal to fucking watch because, and once again, people accuse me of being behind the times or stuck in the past or whatever. I want to do angles and logic that worked 10 years ago, but with guys that were, I said one time in OVW, I tried to do wrestling logic from the 80s with guys that were born in the 80s, when that was 20 years ago or whatever. They were 20-something years old. I wanted to use new talent, but have wrestling make sense like it did. Both George Scott and Ole wanted to use the same guys that drew them money 15 years beforehand. Instead of doing the same things with new talent, you've always got to get the new talent over. But you can recycle the angles, but you can't recycle the fucking talent.
How's he to deal with if you have a concern about something?
Easy. Say, Ole, I'm really worried about this. Well, fuck off.
That's it, right. Funny tidbit, an interview with a fan at home in Philadelphia watching with his family turns out to be Todd Gordon.
I did not know that.
Yes.
I never knew that. Son of a bitch. The reason why he was referred to as a pretender to the throne of Hulk Hogan is because at that point, Vince had convinced everybody, especially in the news media that centered in New York, that he was wrestling and that he was, I mean, it's not like it took much convincing. He was, at that point, the #1 company by a large margin. And it was like, instead of going into like most everything you see on the news, instead of going into the depth of things to find out the details and the truth, they could have said, well, this company was hugely successful and was competitive with Vince only 3-4 years ago, but after Turner Broadcasting bought it, it's fallen in a fucking hole. How would that have looked? And now they're trying to climb out. So all of a sudden they just presented it like it was this new company that was trying to take over this established, you know. I was actually still, this was planned so far ahead, I was still on the committee. Because, now, bear in mind, a guy like Barry Windham returns and it's fucking last minute and all this other shit happens last minute, but this fucking stunning angle was planned 3 months out.
Months in the works.
Months and years in the making. At one of the last meetings I was at, they said, wow,